Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pilgrims Grey Chronicles, and if you haven't guessed from last week, or if you didn't listen to last week's show, I am relatively certain if you're watching the video version of the podcast, then you now know, or at least strongly suspect, who my favorite Middle-earth character is, and who we'll be covering today with Tolkien's work, and I hope you enjoy the show. Got 7 parts to this and some music. I'm really wanting to entertain y'all with this one. It's going to be a cool show. I hope you hang out through the whole thing. Let's go.
Coming from the wild, from the rain and the stone, where the wind has no name and the traveler's alone. There's warmth in the fire and truth in the tale of the watcher who walks where the bold-hearted fail. He carries no sword, yet the darkness gives way to the lantern he lifts at the end of the day. He stands on the watchtower, still and unswayed, where the lost find a path through the fog and the fray. Pilgrims Grey, oh steward of the lands, you carry the light in your weather-worn hands. A tale at the hearth, a guide through the night. You open the gate between the wrong and the right.
Yes. So, welcome back to the Pilgrims Grey Chronicles. Pilgrims Grey Chronicles in, Pilgrims Grey in. We're all travelers on the long road through life, never-ending road, the road that goes ever on. Today, I'm excited because this is a long time coming. I wish I had done this a long time ago because I love Tolkien, I love his work, and I incorporate at least some of the imagery and speech in many of our episodes, whether you realize it or not. And so I want this to be a place where fellow travelers through life along our own hard road are welcome to the Pilgrims Grey Inn, our podcast. It's a place for wanderers, watchmen, lovers of deep story. If you're here because you love Tolkien, then you're among friends. If you are here because you've walked with us through older roads, tracing ancient wars of light and shadow, then tonight you'll recognize something familiar. This episode is for those who know Middle-earth is not escapism, but inheritance. For those who sense that Tolkien was not merely inventing fantasy, but preserving something ancient in mythic form. And if you're new to this channel and Tolkien brought you here, then please feel welcome to sit down with us at the hearth and stay. Because what we're about to explore is not a retelling, but a recovery. You know him as the old man with the staff. You know the smoke-ring laughter, the fireworks, the raised eyebrow. You know the fall in the dark and the return in white. But that's the surface story. Just the surface. And tonight we're going before the gray, and that's why I've entitled it, as you can see here, Before the Gray. Before the hat, before the pipe, before the word wizard even makes sense. Because in Tolkien's world, the character that we call Gandalf has a history that begins really in a form of holiness, in sorrow, and in restraint, and long before he ever steps onto the shores of Middle-earth. And so we're going to tell it like a chronicle, but we're going to investigate it like a case file. So imagine 2 rooms. In the first room, you have a fire, a map, and the familiar road, the movies, right? The moments where everybody remembers because they went to see the movies. But in the second room, we have appendices, unfinished tales, and letters that Tolkien wrote to explain what he meant when readers misunderstood him and question him. And so tonight, we're going to open the second room. And why are we going to do that? Because once you understand who Olórin was before he was Gandalf, once you understand why he was chosen, once you understand that he was what he was forbidden to do, and once you understand the hidden centuries before Bilbo ever found a ring, and the familiar scenes change, All the things you're used to in the movies, the surface stuff, has deeper meaning, and the refusal of the ring becomes heavier. The fallen Moria becomes deeper. The return in white becomes quieter and more mysterious. And by the end of the episode, you won't just see Gandalf differently, I hope. I hope you'll see restraint differently, and authority differently, and power differently. And perhaps, if Tolkien was right about fairy stories reflecting deeper truth, you'll see the long road we're walking now, for this podcast for the last year now, a little bit more clearly as well. And so let's begin where Tolkien begins. Not in a Shire, right? Not with Gandalf anyway. Not in a tavern, and not even in a world yet. And we will start that off with some beautiful music playing in the background. So, before Middle-earth had mountains, and before seas were poured into their beds, and before elves opened their eyes beneath starlight, Tolkien tells us there was music. Not metaphorical music, and not decorative background, but music as architecture, as ontology. And music is the blueprint of reality itself. In the Ainulindalë, or the music of the Ainur, Tolkien does not begin with clashing swords or dark fortresses. He begins with harmony. The One, Iluvatar, Eru Iluvatar, brings forth the Ainur, the Holy Ones, and he gives them themes. Not rigid instructions, but themes. And they begin to sing. And their singing is not passive worship. It is a sort of participation. It's what Tolkien later called sub-creation. But among them arises one who desires something more than harmony, Melkor, who seeks to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. He weaves his own melody into the whole, but not in cooperation, but in his own sense of supremacy or his own vision of things, apart from Eru Iluvatar, and discord enters. So the harmony begins to fracture. And if you've only seen the films, you might expect Tolkien to escalate immediately into cosmic war. But he does not. Instead, Iluvatar responds not with panic or counterattack, but with sovereignty. So Tolkien places in his mouth one of the most decisive lines in the entire legendarium, right? No theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me. And that sentence establishes the moral structure of Middle-earth. Evil is real, of course. Discord is real. Melkor's rebellion is not illusion, but it does not exist outside the providence of Eru Iluvatar. It cannot outrun the design from which it sprang. Then Iluvatar speaks the word that transforms vision into reality. Yeah, let these things be. And with that utterance, what was sung becomes reality. The Ainur behold a vision, and then they descend into it. But here's something subtle and foundational when they enter the world. They do not become gods, they become stewards. Even the greatest among them, the Valar, govern only what they did not originate. And that principle, delegated authority, will echo all the way down to Gandalf's refusal of the ring. And so, among those who enter Arda are the Valar, the great powers who shape sea and stone and wind and light, and beneath them are spirits of lesser degree, the Maiar. They're not necessarily lesser in purity or holiness, but they are lesser in scope. And among the Maiar, Tolkien quietly names one who does not command oceans or raises mountains. He writes, quote, wisest of the Maiar was Olórin. Not strongest, not the mightiest, wisest. And already Tolkien is leaning away from spectacle, wisdom over force, restraint over domination. And he places Olórin not in halls of flame or towers of authority, but in the gardens of Lórien in Valinor, a realm of vision, reflection, and rest. Olórin walks there. He moves in quiet places and he learns. And Tolkien ties him most closely not to the warrior of Valar, but and not to the smith and not to the king, but to Nienna. I assume that's how you pronounce it. There's a quote where he says, "Of her he learned pity and patience." And here's somebody's idea of her, if I can find it. Kaboom! There she is in the background. Get you a good picture of it there. Now, Nienna dwells in sorrow, not despair, but sorrow that refines, and she weeps for the wounds of Arda, or Middle-earth, really. She does not deny grief. She studies it. She teaches endurance within it, and she teaches that suffering can become wisdom instead of bitterness. And Tolkien says, Olórin learned from her. That detail is not decorative. It is formative for him. When Gandalf later speaks mercy over vengeance, when he warns Frodo that pity stayed Bilbo's hand and when he refused to deal out death and judgment, those instincts were not improvised in the Shire. They were formed in the presence of one who understood grief without surrendering to it. And then Tolkien adds a quiet line that kind of changes how we see Gandalf entirely. He walked among them unseen. Unseen. Olórin's earliest mode is not, some powerful, glorious figure. It's invisibility. He moves among the elves, strengthening hearts quietly. He inspires, he prompts, he kindles. He does not dominate. He's not forceful. He's not commanding or authoritative. He does not replace the will of others. Instead, he fortifies it. And now, something begins to click. Centuries later, when the Istari are sent into Middle-earth and are forbidden to reveal themselves in forms of majesty, that limitation is not punishment, it is alignment. The Grey Pilgrims' restrictions in the Third Age match Olórin's character in the Blessed Realm. He was never meant to conquer by unveiling raw power, like wizards in most places, throwing around fireballs and stopping time, all these crazy things. He was meant to awaken courage in those who would fight for themselves. So before there was Gandalf the Grey, before there was Mithrandir, before there was the White Rider, there was Olórin, wisest of the Maiar, student of sorrow, walker unseen, kindler of hearts, and that is the soil and foundation from which the Grey Wanderer grows, right? Look at them happy together. Doesn't look very sorrowful there, does she? So, let's continue. Here we go into Act 2, where I'll get some more music going for y'all. Come on, baby. Fire it up. So by the time the Third Age dawned, Sauron has already fallen once. He has been defeated in open war. Numenor was drowned. The last alliance has broken his body, but in Tolkien's world, evil does not disappear simply because it has been struck down. It withdraws, and it waits, and it reshapes itself. And I know a lot has happened between there and this particular story, but in 90 minutes I can only cover so much, and I'm wanting to just touch upon the portions that I remember and I'm attached to with Gandalf, and why he's my favorite character. I could fill hours with the shows on his character, but I just want to encapsulate in this 60 to 90 minutes, probably closer to 90, who he is and why I like him and what I think about him. And hopefully, you all will enjoy that. And what I would like is if you have stories that I missed that are more important to you, please share them in the comments, because I love hearing all about it. I really do. So, the Valar in the West know something. that they did not fully understand in the earliest wars against Melkor. Direct intervention by overwhelming force devastates the world it is meant to save. In their struggle with the first Dark Lord, mountains were broken, seas were reshaped, entire lands were wounded or went underwater. Victory came, yes, but the cost was written into the bones of the earth itself. And I wanted to find, I like that picture of them there. There's what I'm looking for. Them singing at the beginning of the world. And that's what is called the creation epic there. Ainulindalë. So, when Sauron rises again in shadow, not yet openly crowned but gathering power quietly, the Valar do not send armies, and they do not descend in unveiled glory. They choose a different strategy, and they send emissaries. But Tolkien is careful to define exactly what that means. The Istari are not spirits playing dress-up, right? They are not angelic beings pretending to be old men while secretly retaining unlimited power. They are, in Tolkien's own words, quote, clad in bodies as of men, real and not feigned. Now, what does that mean, real and not feigned? Well, that phrase matters because it means their embodiment isn't just theatrical, it's ontological. They experience hunger, they tire, they feel fear, they experience doubt, they can suffer, and they can fail. And this is crucial because if Gandalf were merely pretending to be old, then his weariness would be an act. His pain would be cosmetic. His fall in Moria would be just an illusion. And for those discovering it for the first time, sorry, he falls. Spoiler alert. But Tolkien insists otherwise. These bodies are real. The wizards are diminished on purpose, and they are further restrained. Tolkien tells us they were forbidden to reveal themselves in forms of majesty. They are not to walk Middle-earth as blazing archangels, and they are not to terrify kings into obedience. So, they are supposed to persuade, right? They're not to dazzle the free peoples into submission by overwhelming with spiritual spectacle, right? And they must counsel, and they must endure, and like I said, persuade. And then comes the boundary that explains nearly every restraint Gandalf practices across the ages. They are forbidden to match his power with power, even against Sauron, especially against Sauron. And that sentence reshapes the entire War of the Ring. The wizards are not sent to defeat Sauron by superior magical force. They are sent to prevent despair from consuming Middle-earth long enough for its peoples to resist. They are catalysts, not conquerors. In letter 156, Tolkien steps outside the narrative and clarifies their mission plainly. Their task, he says, was to, quote, train, advise, instruct, arouse the hearts and minds, unquote. That is not the language of domination. That is the language of formation and encouragement. The wizards are teachers, advisors, awakeners. They are there to stir courage in others, not to replace it and take over. And embedded within this commission is a risk, of course. If you send beings of great power into a world where power corrupts and you bind them into weakness, you're creating a test of sorts, right? A test of humility, a test of patience, a test of whether they will remember they were sent not to rule, but to serve. And some will remember, and some will forget, right? So this is where the contrast between Olórin and Cuomo begins to take shape. Saruman arrives skilled, knowledgeable, confident in lore. He studies rings, he studies devices, he studies the mechanisms of power. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he begins to believe that the way to defeat domination is to control it. He believes he can wield power safely. Olórin does not. He feared Sauron. He knew the seduction of control. He understood the danger of believing oneself strong enough to remain pure while grasping ultimate authority. So the limitations placed upon the Istari are not arbitrary. They are moral safeguards. They are constrained because unconstrained power tempts even the wise, which is why Gandalf's later refusal of the ring is not a spontaneous act of humility. It is the logical culmination of the commission he received while in the West. And he was never meant to match power with power. Although he could have, he was certainly strong enough. He was meant to awaken resistance in others, and he was meant to be a fire that kindles, not a blaze that consumes the enemy. And that is why, for centuries, he will wander rather than rule, and he will counsel rather than command, and he will strengthen kings rather than become one himself. And sometimes impatiently and frustratedly so, right? Those are some of my favorite parts of Gandalf, is his grouchier moments when he's, as like, time is wasting, folks, and you're acting like a bunch of screw-ups. Let's go. So the Istari commission is not about magic. It is about restraint. It is not about overwhelming darkness with brighter force. It is about preserving free will long enough for courage to act. And once you get that, right, once you internalize the rules placed upon the wizards in Tolkien's work, Gandalf's entire life in Middle-earth begins to make more sense. He's not failing to use his power. He is obeying his commission from the Valar, right? So when Tolkien recounts the choosing of the Istari in the book, if you've read it, and I'll put links to the books in the description if you want to look at some of them or purchase them if you've never heard them before. But this is a great one. If you don't have this one, I highly recommend it. Unfinished Tales. And so in that book, he does not describe a triumphant assembly of volunteers eager for glory, right? The moment feels much more quiet and solemn. So the Valar perceive the growing shadow in Middle-earth and debate how to respond, right? They will not go themselves. They will not risk another cataclysm like the wars against Melkor. Instead, emissaries must be sent, they decide. Lesser spirits, constrained, incarnate, limited. So when names are considered, Olórin does not leap forward. He doesn't wave his hand, and jump up and down. Tolkien tells us that when he was summoned, he hesitated. He did not argue for his qualifications. He did not present himself as obvious. Instead, Tolkien preserves this remarkable admission. Quote, he was too weak and feared Sauron. That line deserves to be absorbed. Too weak, feared Sauron. Not underestimated him and not dismissed him. He feared him. So in many myths, fear disqualifies the hero, right? In Tolkien's world, fear can reveal clarity. To fear rightly is to understand what one is facing. Olórin does not imagine himself immune to corruption. He does not assume he can match the enemy without risk, and he does not romanticize the task before him. And Tolkien records the reply, almost paradoxical in its logic, right? In a quote here, it says, a quote, all the more reason why he should go, unquote. All the more reason. I love that line. It just shows how wise he is as a figure. So in Tolkien's moral structure, humility is the qualification. Awareness of weakness is preparation. So the one who knows he is not sufficient in himself is the one least likely to grasp for illegitimate strength. Before he is called Mithrandir, before he is known as Gandalf, before he ever wears gray, he is the Maiar who understands the danger. He does not crave the task. He does not treat the mission lightly. He fears Sauron, and he goes anyway. I think that's awesome. And there is something profoundly, I guess I'll invent a word here, Tolkienian in that pattern. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is obedience in spite of it, right? I'm sure you've heard something along those lines before. The one who trembles at the weight of the calling may be better suited to carry it than the one who sees only his own strength. Olórin's reluctance is not weakness in the shallow sense. It is moral sobriety. He understands that to enter Middle-earth under constraint in a mortal body, forbidden to reveal his full nature, is to enter genuine risk. And the task will not be theatrical, it will be costly. And this is where the gray begins. Not in fireworks, not in confrontation at the bridge, but in hesitation and obedience. And with that, we'll go to song number 3 and into Act 3 of 7. So, did Olórin walk Middle-earth earlier? Well, in the published narrative of The Lord of the Rings and its appendices, the Istari appear in Middle-earth around the year roughly 1000 of the Third Age. Unlike the Rings of Power. That is the clean, familiar timeline. But Tolkien's Legendarium did not freeze in 1955. He continued revising, reconsidering, and expanding the backstory of his world for the rest of his life, which is so cool. And in some of his late writings, preserved by his son Christopher Tolkien in the History of Middle-earth, Volume 12, The Peoples of Middle-earth, we find something I'd never seen before until I read it. In the section often referred to as the Last Writings, Tolkien re-examines the origin and missions of the wizard. And in one note, speaking of Olórin, he writes that he had already visited Middle-earth, is likely, unquote. And so that's interesting phrasing, right? Is likely. So Tolkien does not assert it as fixed history necessarily. He suggests probability, which is what I love about it. It's his own work, but I like that he speaks like that about his work. So this is not published narrative canon in the same sense as the Silmarillion, right? It is late reflection, Tolkien just thinking again about how deep the roots of certain characters might go. So why would he consider this? Well, because in the late 1960s, Tolkien was revising his understanding of the Blue Wizards. In some earlier material, they arrived in the Third Age. In later notes, Tolkien moved their arrival back into the Second Age, suggesting they may have come much earlier to hinder Sauron in the East. Now, once that chronological door opened, the question naturally followed, well, if other Istari could have come earlier, might Olórin have had some prior contact with Middle-earth before the formal Third Age commission? So then comes another fragmented, preserved in this writing number 12. It says, a text often associated with Elisar tradition and Galadriel's history. In that manuscript, Tolkien includes the line, quote, and on a time Olórin came to Galadriel, unquote. So that line does not come from the published Silmarillion. It appears in late drafts and variant traditions. Christopher Tolkien carefully notes that these texts represent his father's evolving thought rather than a finalized narrative. So it's an important distinction because we're not inventing a new canon here. We're just observing Tolkien's own speculative reconsiderations. He allowed himself to imagine that Olórin may have walked Middle-earth earlier, not as Gandalf the Grey, not under constraint as one of the Istari, but maybe as the Maiar. He always was, right? Moving quietly, unseen, strengthening hearts through counsel. And if you notice, and by the way, many of you who are familiar with the fact that we covered the biblical seed war might see parallels here. You might find interesting. I know I do all the time. I know Tolkien didn't necessarily mean them, but sometimes because we're dealing with archetypes here, it just does. If many of you are already thinking about, the divine council, the sons of God appearing as humans on the earth in flesh and guiding men and not interfering with free will, then yeah, we're thinking somewhat along the same lines. So notice what does not change, though, even in the variants. The ethical shape of Olórin remains consistent. He is not imagined as arriving in blazing authority. He does not conquer. He does not reveal himself in majesty. Even in these late fragments where Tolkien is musing, his pattern is still wisdom, pity, and resistance to despair. And I always think of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields when I think about that, and how he helped the men not to fail, right? So wherever Gandalf was, people were encouraged. And so that continuity matters more than the exact date, really, doesn't it? So because whether Olórin first walked Middle-earth in the Third Age under formal commission, or whether Tolkien later considered that he may have visited earlier, the character remains the same, right? The unseen counselor, the kindler, the one who strengthens rather than dominates. And for those of you who are Tolkien veterans, I'm not a super in-depth nerd on this. I know a lot of people who know 10 times the amount I do about this kind of stuff. And I just recently came across a girl's page that I've enjoyed listening to her content. I think her name is Kella Braidbird or something like that. I'll look it up. Anyway, her content's really great, and I would love to have her on the show. So if she's listening, please come on the show. I'd love to talk about some of the stuff with you. So what makes it powerful is not the novelty of earlier arrival, right? It is the implication. Olórin's concern for Middle-earth may have begun long before he ever wore the gray robes under his commission, right? His watchfulness may have preceded his visible mission, which means the Grey Wanderer's roots may stretch further back than most readers ever imagined, right? I know before I read those things, it was definitely not on my bingo chart. I promise you that. I had no idea until I read some of these things. So with that in mind, let's go to the Grey Havens, where I would love to visit. I love the sea and being near it, but for myself, I don't like being on a boat that is no longer inside of land. Is that weird? It freaks me out. So let's go into the Grey Havens, right? We step onto firm chronological ground now. Whatever Tolkien later reconsidered in drafts and late notes, the published tradition is clear. In The Lord of the Rings, Appendix B, under the Tale of Years, Tolkien writes, they first appeared in Middle-earth about the year 1000 of the Third Age, right? That's definitely not speculation. It is the canonical timeline anchor. Right around the Third Age, 1000, the Istari arrive. But Tolkien does not introduce them like conquering angels, of course. He does not describe a blaze of unveiled glory descending from the west. Instead, in Unfinished Tales, in the chapter titled The Istari, he preserved a detail that feels almost like a parable. Here's a quote. Quote, "The last came one who seemed the least," unquote. That is Tolkien's phrasing. Not tallest, not the most radiant, not the most commanding. The last who seemed the least, unquote. So already Tolkien is shaping how we are meant to see Gandalf, right? And so Saruman arrives first, robed in glorious white, bearing authority, chief of the order, but the one who will matter most to the fate of the Third Age appears unimpressive. Gray-haired, clad in worn garments, leaning on a staff, elderly in appearance, mortal in form. And here at the Grey Havens, Mithlond, under the guardianship of Círdan, the shipwright, something extraordinary happens. Círdan perceives what others do not. And again, this is preserved in Unfinished Tales. Please read it, you'll love it. The Istari, Tolkien writes, that Círdan saw deeper into Gandalf than the others did, and in a quiet, almost private act, he entrusts him with one of the three rings of the elves, Narya, the Ring of Fire. Now, this is not stated in the main narrative of The Lord of the Rings, although you see it on the bridge, right? It is revealed in Appendix B and then expanded in Unfinished Tales, and Tolkien preserves Círdan's words, quote, "Take now this ring, for your labors will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. For this is the Ring of Fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill," unquote. Again, not a paraphrase. That is Tolkien's exact words. With it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill. It's almost as if he also perceived his mission from the Valar. without it being told to him. So that is Gandalf's mission statement, right? Not defeat Sauron in single combat, annihilate him with light, not replace the kings of men who are failing, not rule the West because they're screw-ups, but instead take who's already there and rekindle their hearts and help them to remember in a world that is growing cold, right? Wake the NPCs up. So that single line reframes everything Gandalf does across the Third Age. His power is not merely defensive or strategic, it is restorative. He strengthens Theoden when despair has frozen him. He awakens courage in Bilbo. He trusts Frodo when others only see weakness, and he lights small fires in unlikely places. So, I really love this image. I need to find out who that is that did that artwork. Here, as you can see in this upper left, let me expand this because this is a cool painting. Here we have them singing the creation into existence, and Nienna again here. Very cool. I like this too. We have some more interesting artwork. The Shire that he was so fond of. A nice little map of that where we have the west farthing, east farthing, south. Well, in him on a bird. Let's leave that there for now, shall we? So, it's interesting. You think of all these little small fires he ignites, and Tolkien does make something else clear in the Istari portion of Unfinished Tales. Gandalf's spirit was warm and eager, right? And his opposition to Sauron was expressed not in domination, but in a different kind of fire. Not the fire that devours and wastes, but in this fire that kindles and sustains people. And so I want to tread carefully here because Tolkien fans, like myself, are very touchy about things, and I totally get it. The guy is a genius. But Tolkien famously rejected allegory, right? So in the foreword to the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, he wrote, quote, "I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations," unquote. So we cannot say Gandalf is meant to be a Christ figure. Tolkien would completely resist that framing. But Tolkien also wrote that his work was, quote, "fundamentally religious and Catholic," unquote, and that myth can reflect and contain truth without becoming direct allegory. And when you hear Círdan's words, rekindle in a world that grows chill, it's difficult not to hear archetypal resonance, right? Like I was saying earlier. In the Gospels, many expected a conquering Messiah, right? A political overthrower, this military deliverer that was going to just destroy the Roman Empire. But instead, we got Christ's earthly ministry rekindling hearts. He restored sight, not just physically, but, spiritually, waking people up, awakening NPCs, so to speak. He strengthened the weak and awakened faith, and he did not seize Rome's throne. So that parallel does not mean that Tolkien wrote Gandalf as Jesus, but Tolkien himself would reject such a simplistic mapping, and rightfully so. It's his writings, right? But archetypes echo because truth echoes. And whether Tolkien consciously intended that resonance or not, the pattern is there. Victory, not through domination, but through restoration. Not through spectacle, but through kindling. Not through seizing power, but through strengthening the humble. Here's a map. And here's a council. We'll leave it on the council for now. So, for Tolkien fans, this is where the legendarium kind of deepens, because once you see Narya not as a magical accessory, but as a vocation or part of his charge, right? Gandalf's entire long labor in Middle-earth begins to make way more moral sense too. So the Grey Wanderer is not just wandering aimlessly, right? Not all who wander are lost. He's tending embers, and he has been doing it for 2,000 years, right? Before the major stuff starts to happen. We have to remember that. 2,000 years. So let's get into that, right? The long watch of that 2,000 years, because a lot happens, right? Part 5. So, from the year 1000 of the Third Age to the fall of Sauron in 3019, Gandalf's mission spans more than 2,000 years. And that number alone should give us pause, right? The War of the Ring feels immediate in the narrative, but Tolkien's timeline in Appendix B, The Tale of Years, reveals something staggering. Gandalf is not a crisis responder, right? He is a long watcher. Appendix B gives us anchor points, almost like entries in a chronicle, right? Under the year 2063, we read, quote, Gandalf goes to Dol Guldur, Sauron retreats and hides in the east, unquote. That is Tolkien's wording. Now, that single sentence implies obvious danger, right? So, and reconnaissance and confrontation, but it's told with deliberate restraint. Gandalf enters a fortress of shadow, but he's not there to blow it to pieces or conquer it, right? He's examining and testing, and Sauron withdraws, not because he's defeated, but because he's not ready to challenge Gandalf or any of them yet. And so the result is what Tolkien calls the Watchful Peace, this period stretching roughly from 2063 to 2460. But peace does not mean victory, right? Obviously, it's just a delay. It means the enemy is consolidating elsewhere. It means the board is still in play. So Appendix B then records the return, 2460. Sauron returns with increased strength to Dol Guldur, and the shadow has never gone. It is only hidden. And what happens next reveals something deeply human about Tolkien's wise. They hesitate. They debate. They mistrust one another. The White Council is formed in 2463, and this too is in Appendix B, but action does not come quickly. Saruman, who leads the council, dismisses Gandalf's suspicion for years. Pride clouds judgment, right? So Gandalf's method becomes clearer here. He does not seize control of the council. He does not overthrow Saruman. Rather, he persuades and he warns. He returns to the issue again and again. In 2850, Tolkien records that Gandalf again enters Dol Guldur, and this time he discovers the truth. The necromancer is indeed Sauron. He also finds Thrain II, father of Thorin Oakenshield, imprisoned there. That detail comes from Appendix A, quote, that's called Durin's Folk, and it's expanded in Unfinished Tales under the Quest of Erebor. It is in Dol Guldur that Gandalf receives the map and key that will later set in motion the quest of Erebor, the Lonely Mountain. So, our famous director got some things right. So that is not coincidence, by the way. It's a strategy. In 2941, Appendix B states simply, quote, Saruman agrees to an attack on Dol Guldur, unquote. The council finally moves. Sauron abandons the fortress and returns openly to Mordor. But Tolkien later clarifies in Unfinished Tales that this attack was not isolated from other events. Gandalf had long feared an alliance between Smaug in the north and Sauron in the south. So in the Quest of Erebor, or Bilbo's journey, Tolkien presents Gandalf explaining that he deliberately encouraged Thorin's expedition to remove Smaug as a potential weapon of the enemy. And Gandalf was thinking not in scenes, but in centuries, playing the long game. And while these great chess moves unfold, Tolkien quietly records other deeds of Gandalf that rarely make it into popular retelling or the movies. Appendix B notes the long winter of 2758 to 2759, when Gandalf aids the Shire, right? The hobbits remember this. It is part of why they trust him long before Bilbo's adventure. And this was not a dramatic war. It was relief work, stewardship, and presence, right? Helping, rekindling. In 2851, at a meeting of the White Council, Gandalf urges that the ring be sought and destroyed. Saruman overrules him. Gandalf does not storm out. He continues the long watch. I probably, knowing myself, would have argued until I couldn't talk anymore. Because I need to grow up, I guess, in certain areas of my life. But I'm learning. I do try to cut things short and be discerning about who I debate with. So while doing this, he befriends Aragorn in 2956 and encourages him in secrecy, guiding him without public proclamation. And this is recorded in Appendix A under the Tale of Aragorn and Arwen. Gandalf sees the Hidden King long before anybody else, and maybe even Aragorn does. So over and over again, Gandalf operates as steward, not sovereign. He strengthens what is weak and already there. He prepares what is hidden, and he removes threats before they combine. And so when we reach the events that feel immediate, right? Bilbo's finding of the ring in 2941, Frodo's inheritance decades later, those aren't spontaneous moments. They are the visible peaks of a mountain range built over 2,000 years. And Gandalf's greatness is not that he casts powerful spells, though he does, in the goblin, thing. White light went everywhere, searing, burning, frying, blinding, right? It is that he endures, right? He does not conquer councils or persuade. He doesn't seize kingdoms. He prepares kings, and he does not destroy the shadow in a single blow. He weakens it patiently, strategically, and morally, like he's following a set of rules from the Valar. And by the time the War of the Ring arrives, Gandalf is not improvising. He is executing a long, faithful, arduous watch. And part of that is his refusal of the ring, which is Act 6, that we will get into now with some more cool music. So, when Frodo offers the ring in Bag End, most listeners remember the theatrical moment, right? The rising voice, the sudden shadow that comes, and the rolling thunder in the room. But Tolkien later explained that in the book, that scene that he writes about is far more chilling the way he describes it. In Letter 246, he writes plainly, quote, Gandalf, as Ring Lord, would have been far worse than Sauron, unquote. Right? And he's not exaggerating at all, and it is not just some casual flippant thing he writes. When Tolkien means it is this: Sauron desires domination openly. He wants control, order, submission. His evil is naked and obvious, but Gandalf, if he took the ring, would begin with the intention of doing what is good. He would desire to set things right, to end suffering, to force peace. And that is precisely the danger, right? We're from the government, and we're here to help you. So, because the ring does not simply amplify strength, right? It amplifies will. It magnifies the desire to impose one's vision upon the world. And a wise, compassionate being with immense willpower could, under the ring's influence, justify increasingly harsh measures for the greater good. And so Tolkien explains elsewhere that the ring would have corrupted Gandalf, but not by turning him into a fire-breathing tyrant overnight. It would have twisted his desire to heal into a demand to rule. In other words, Gandalf's danger was not that he would be cruel or cruelty. It was righteousness weaponized. And that is why his refusal is so important. It's not just modesty or humbleness. It's not self-doubt. It is fidelity to the mission established in Unfinished Tales, right, where the Istari were forbidden to match his power with power. And Gandalf understands that to take the ring would be to violate the very terms of his commission, amongst other things. So he doesn't refuse because he lacks the strength. He refuses because he understands power all too well. So the temptation scene then is not simply dramatic tension. It is the culmination of 2,000 years of discipline, right? A Maiar formed in pity by Nienna, bound in embodied limitation, entrusted with Narya to rekindle hearts, not to command and force them. So if he takes the ring, the entire architecture collapses. And that is why the room darkens when he speaks, because he's telling the truth. He would become terrible. and enforce his will, whether you whether you wanted it or not. You know, it kind of reminds me of that AI story that we covered last week, where the guy instructed his Claude bot to go out and save the world of the environment. And this thing literally started sending out messaging and doing all these things. And so the guy had to wind up trying to shut it down. But it basically told his human that this mission is more important than you or anything else. It wouldn't let him shut it down. He wound up having to destroy his computer to stop it. Really, really interesting and crazy. If you haven't heard that show, you should really check it out. But with that, let's go ahead now and move on to our final act, Act 7, dealing with Moria, death, and the authority beyond the Valar. And those of you who are experts on the subject know who I'm referencing. So, Act 7 music. In Moria, Gandalf does not faint. He does not vanish in smoke. He does not escape dramatically. He fights a being of his own order, a corrupted Maiar, a Balrog of Morgoth, and he expends himself fully. He falls, and Tolkien makes clear that when he falls, he truly died. So in The Two Towers, Gandalf later recounts the experience to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and his language is precise. He says, quote, "Naked I was sent back for a brief time until my task is done," unquote. That line alone tells us something extraordinary, right? He does not say, I returned. He says he was sent back. And so he also describes passing out of thought and time. Now, that phrase is not poetic flourish. It signals that his experience was beyond the structure that governed Arda, beyond the world's temporal flow. So now here's where Tolkien himself steps in outside the narrative. In letter 156, did I ever show you the Grey Havens? By the way, let me expand this real quick for you. You can see the Gulf of Lune here, and you can see the Grey Havens is right here, right? Near Lindon, the Tower Hills, the Far Downs, and Eriador, right? And the River Lune. And they would sail out of that. Let's see if I can find a good map of Middle-earth. On the big map of Middle-earth, we were talking about, this region right in here. This map that I've got up right here is my desktop. It's what I use for my desktop. And you can see that not only does it include the lands you know from the Third Age, it also includes Beleriand, East Beleriand. You can see Numenor down here in the bottom left. At least I think you can. Let me expand that out. And you can see Numenor fell and is under the water, and now because of the warfare with Morgoth and other things, this entire region from these mountains on the western shore of Eriador, which is now a coastline, everything west of there fell into the sea. Pretty terrible. All right. Since we're on the end, we'll show him walking away. How's that? Yeah. All right. The singers agree. So, in The Two Towers, again, we hear that he says that he is returned, right? And that he goes out of thought and time. So in this letter, 156, responding to a reader's theological questions, Tolkien clarifies that Gandalf's death was real and that his return was not something arranged by the Valar in the ordinary sense. He writes that Gandalf, quote, really died, unquote, and that his return was an act of authority beyond the gods of the world, meaning, of course, beyond the Valar. And so Tolkien says explicitly that Gandalf passed out of thought and time and that his restoration was not within the normal governance of those powers, right? Which is a massive statement because in Tolkien's cosmology, the Valar are not ultimate. They are great and powerful. Think of them as the Greek titans or gods, but they are created. They do not control life and death absolutely. Only Eru Iluvatar does. So it's sort of the Yahweh of the Silmarillion. So when Gandalf is sent back, Tolkien is signaling that the intervention comes from the highest authority in his mythology. But Tolkien is also careful not to turn this into a direct allegory. So in letter 181, he insists that Gandalf's return is not the resurrection of Christ in fictional form. In fact, he says it is not really the same thing at all. Tolkien resists, of course, one-to-one allegory. Yet he does allow resonance. And here's the key distinction. Gandalf's return is a reinstatement of mission, not the redemption of the world. He's sent back until his task is done. His authority increases. He becomes Gandalf the White, but his vocation remains the same. Right? He does not claim a throne. He does not seize rule. He restores Theoden. He counsels Aragorn. He breaks Saruman's staff, and then he steps aside. And then Tolkien also explains in letter 156 what he means by the wizards being incarnate. He says that by incarnate, he literally means capable of pain and weariness and fear. And Gandalf's embodiment was real. His suffering was real. His death was real. And so his return carries weight because it follows genuine sacrifice. You know, it was real to Gandalf. It hurt. And so the transformation from gray to white is not a power upgrade. It is a renewal of commission. Saruman, who fell through pride, is stripped. Gandalf, who remained faithful, is confirmed. By the way, the dialogue between Saruman and Gandalf and others is brilliant. I love it. But also notice this, even after returning with greater authority, Gandalf does not dominate. He does not command armies again as some sort of supreme ruler. I mean, he does aid in battle and so on and so forth, but he continues the same pattern we traced from Valinor: wisdom, restraint, counsel, kindling hearts. So the gray is still there inside the white. So the long watch continues, but now with urgency, right? Tolkien wrote, quote, "Not by the gods, for he passed out of thought and time," unquote. So Gandalf returns as the white, but he does not return as a king. He raises Theoden out of his stupor, right? Almost like a possession from Saruman. He counsels Aragorn. He breaks Saruman's staff. And again, like I said, he steps aside. His mission really never changed. So Tolkien acknowledged that some readers hear a gospel resonance in Gandalf's death and return, but he refused to reduce it again to allegory. Again, like letter 181 says, it's really not the same thing at all. But one thing I do want to say is that Tolkien did believe something profound about myth. After a late-night walk with C.S. Lewis in 1931, a conversation that would deeply influence Lewis's eventual conversion, Tolkien wrote a poem called Mythopoeia. I think that's how it's pronounced. In it, he rejects the idea that myth is a lie. Instead, he argues that myth is a refracted light, a splintered beam of a greater truth. And in that poem, he writes words that matter here. He says, quote, "The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise and still recalls him." And then, speaking of Christianity, Tolkien writes something breathtaking. He says, quote, "The Evangelion has not abrogated legends. It has hallowed them. Christ is the true myth." And that is Tolkien's language. It's not an allegory or replacement. It's his own words, fulfillment. And he believed that the gospel was not the destruction of myth, but the myth that became fact, the story that entered history for real. Which means when we read Gandalf or Frodo or Aragorn, we're not reading competitors to scripture, we're reading subcreations, right? Reflections, echoes, fragments of a greater light. And Tolkien himself explained in letter 131 that he was a, quote, subcreator, unquote, working within a world made by another, right? And subcreator matters, right? It's not ultimate author, not divine originator, but a steward of story. And that brings us back to the gray archetype. The long watch the hidden labor, the refusal to seize power even when power could be justified, the courage to kindle small flames in cold places like little hobbit people, or people who are despairing, right? And that is why I and others love Gandalf, and that is why this podcast leans into the imagery of an inn. You can see it behind me. That's the Pilgrims Grey Inn. I mean, it's not, but, it's just AI art, but it's there, right? So this is not a gathering place. Well, it is. The inn is a gathering place on the road where we study maps of the world. Our candles burn low, as you can see on the walls. And watchmen speak honestly about the age, and that's you all. When you come and you email me or leave messages or whatever, it's not escapism, right? But it's formation. Olórin was sent not to dominate, not to replace kings, but to rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill. And Tolkien believed every storyteller, every craftsman, every faithful steward operates in that same pattern or capacity on a smaller scale, whether it's me and my podcast or what you do. Even if it's something as simple as commenting on this post, liking it, sharing it, leaving a review, whatever you do, or whatever other things you do, taking care of your animals at home. We have goats outside. We take care of our goats, and we do it with great kindness because we love our goats, and they keep our fence lines very clean, all the way up to 5 or 6 feet off the ground. It's very nice. So Eru sent Gandalf into Middle-earth with limits and a mission. And each of us in our own sphere carries stewardship, right? Maybe not wizardry, maybe not cosmic authority, but we have our influence, and we're made in the image of the weaver of life. We have our responsibility. We have our calling. And Tolkien once wrote during wartime to his son, quote, "Evil labors in vain, preparing always only the soil for unexpected good to sprout in," unquote. That immediately reminds me of the story of Joseph. So that is not naive optimism. That is hard-won hope. And if you're a Tolkien fan who also loves Christ, then you understand that bridge instinctively. Not because Middle-earth replaces Scripture, but because Tolkien believes Scripture is the great story that made Middle-earth possible. So if you're a Tolkien fan who does not share that faith, of course you're still welcome at this inn. I have plenty of friends that are Tolkien fans who don't believe the same things I believe. So all of us gather because we love the depth, the beauty, the moral seriousness of Tolkien's world and the history of it. And we study it carefully and we honor it honestly. And if tonight rekindled something in you, or if it reminded you why Gandalf matters and how awesome he was, and I don't know, in this world, which isn't Middle-earth, sometimes when I think about Gandalf and the stories I've read, he may not obviously have meant in reality for our hearts to be kindled, but I feel like his task or his mission even works in our world, even though it was fiction. My heart gets kindled to spur on to do good deeds because of the character of Gandalf. It's my favorite character, right? So anyway, if you found all of that beneficial, then please help us keep the inn lit, right? We've added a simple buy me a coffee link for those who want to support our work here and spread it out far and wide to an even further audience with greater reach. And again, no pressure. Anybody who's watched this podcast for the last year knows that I hate doing the call to actions. I just put it out there because many people have asked, what can I do to help support you? And in fact, anything you can do that's like putting a log of fire in the end, whether you want to donate money or if you want to give a one-time gift. I think with Buy Me a Coffee, you can actually set up a monthly payment. And I'm planning on setting up a website where I do special things for people who do that. Like I plan to upload my PDF notes. I plan to put my transcripts up there, the music from certain episodes, our band's music. I'll also answer people's questions who are there, who are monthly payers, before I answer anybody else's. Things along that nature. I'm thinking about adding some other things if that's something you want to do. I don't have it set up yet, but you're welcome to leave a gift, or leave us a 5-star review, or share it, whatever you want to do. So, and if the episode strengthened you, share it with another Tolkien fan. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Like, I would love to hear what your thoughts, how Gandalf inspired you. Stories that I didn't get to touch because I'm going on like 90 minutes. So I have to limit these shows. So I try to write about just the things that are on my heart and mind. And these were the things that I thought about when I was writing about Gandalf. I plan to do maybe a show like this, maybe once a month when I can get to it. We have some interviews coming up this month and next month. And so maybe I'll try to do, because I love Tolkien's work so much, I'll try to do some other shows similar to this, excuse me. Anyway, as long as there's cold places in the world, there's always going to be a need for those willing to carry on a little fire, right, in their own heart and spreading it to others. And so with that, wherever you go, spread your fire. I wish you Godspeed. And, Gandalf is awesome. I wanted to share my favorite quote because in The Return of the King, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, I was struck with such a sense of overwhelming, the first time I read it, there's no way they can win this. They're all going to die, And I remember I remember Gandalf being asked, I can't remember the exact question he was asked, but his response was, "The darkness has begun. There will be no dawn." And I get goosebumps to this day every time I read it. And I read his work, once a year, or I listen to it in an audiobook. And that line always just gets to me because and you would think, well, after so many times, no, it still always gets to me because I know now that I've read it more than once or heard it more than once, I know what's coming. And so when I read that line, I'm like, oh man, if they have no idea how dark it's going to get, And then I always think of, see, I got goosebumps even now. So, and then the council that comes later when they go to the Black Gate. And I always think of Prince Imrahil. In fact, when I used to play Diablo 2, I would always name my paladin Imrahil after that character because I thought it was so great, the Swan Knights and how each one of them, because so few would come to Gondor's aid, but just seeing Imrahil and his knights, one knight was worth 100 men because their prowess in battle was so great, Anyway, I could go on and on and on and on, but we need to wrap it up. And so I will see you next week at the end where we have an interview, but I don't want to jinx it because so often it seems like things happen. So I'll just let it go and you can see who's going to be interviewed next week when and if it happens. If not, I have other things on the board that we can. There's always, you all know, you're living out there in this world. There's always something to talk about. So Godspeed to you all and have a great work week. We'll see you.
Hey! Gather round, ye travelers, lend me your ear. A tale of heroes who knew no fear. Through shadowed woods and mountains steep, their legacy lives where the wild winds sweep. Raise your tankards high and sing for the grey pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Their stories stay. Hail the chronicles of Pilgrims Grey.
Murs carried on the ale-soaked breeze, songs as endless as the trees. Raise your 10 cups.